Greetings everyone, this will be my answer to the why you are an anti-nihilist contest. Kinda nervous, first time doing some random video, but I guess I'll just rant and talk about my thoughts. So, the first question you might ask is, why are you against procreation? Well, I think the first thing you should ask yourself before answering the question is, what are you going to accomplish by procreating? And that goes by what are human, what are animals, if you're going to birth a cat or a human, doesn't matter, what is it, okay, what are we? And if you want to have any decent context for that, arguably you have to first look at our origins and how that molded us and how that has an impact on our function nowadays. And for that, I would argue that from a philosophical standpoint, you have to give a lot of importance to evolution. And even in the preface, not a preface, but one of the first chapters of The Selfish Gene that Richard Dawkins, he's still alive and well and having debates, so good for him for now. He wrote this book 40 years ago at this point, maybe a little more. And he said in the first chapter, I'll read this part, sorry. Today the theory of evolution is about as much open to doubt as the theory that the Earth goes around the Sun. But the full implication of Darwin's revolution have yet to be widely realized. Zoology is still a minority subject in universities, and even those who choose to study it often make their decision without appreciating its profound philosophical significance. Philosophy and the subject known as humanities are still taught as if Darwin has never lived. And he said, no doubt this will change in time. And I would argue that nowadays people are still not taking, generally speaking, are not taking evolution seriously from a philosophical standpoint, how that has an impact on, what we are, the human condition, the animal condition. So, the point of this book, The Selfish Gene, is that essentially life began as a replicating molecule, a chemical reaction that was self-sustaining in the right environment, and it was able to be modified, through an environment, through accidents here and there, and that allowed change. And obviously you had a kind of law, the stables, that when a thing is more efficient than others at maintaining its own existence, you're going to see it more often on average. And that's the whole idea of the selfish gene, is that the genes that you're going to see in living organisms, in that tree and inside of me and the bug over there, are genes that still exist nowadays, because throughout the ages, without knowing it, they're not conscious or anything, but they were really, really, really good at maintaining their own existence. So that would select genes to have a selfish, effect. Not in the sense that would necessarily build selfish organisms. Obviously you can see altruism in many species, but more like the gene will be really good at maintaining its own survival. So you can see altruism in ants. They help each other, they cooperate, they protect the queen and all this stuff. But the reason why worker ants, with their traits that code for this altruism and this apparently selfless behavior, the reason why those genes still exist is because they protect another copy of the same gene in the queen. So basically, we know that's from a functional standpoint, but now we have to get into the ethics of it. And obviously, if we're going to talk about morality or anything like that, it has to do with the welfare of sentient beings. So, sentience, right? It's a thing that appeared, brains developed little by little because basically genes had to make machines that would make decisions that on average would increase the chances of their own survival. So, we're basically born from a process that naturally selected the protection of genes that allowed the existence of our brains, which means that our brains are going to be, they evolved there was no intent behind it, but they basically evolved to be genetically productive, and that has a big impact. Obviously, there was a need for computing various informations and reacting to it accordingly, but at some point it was easier to have some kind of central system that could give priorities to a certain task over some others. And the process that nature has seemed to find for this is suffering, right? Emotions in general. The idea that this will feel more important than that. So I have a little paper that I wrote just to have some notes here and there in case I get lost. But the issue is that brains basically require some motivational mechanism to make the right decision in a way that gives priority and not just knee-jerk reflexes over and over again. Because obviously there are some really simple organisms out there and everywhere pretty much that do have a nervous system, but it's basically just reactions, right? There's no complex processing going on. And basically the core motivational mechanisms that nature stumbled upon without intent again is suffering. That's where all evil stems from, arguably. So basically when we look at animals, you can look at a panda or a bird or human beings, we are temporary survival machines for genes that we carry. And we're programmed to not want to die or suffer because dying is associated, with not passing on your genes, so we stumble upon that fear by itself, and the suffering is associated to things that tend to be detrimental to survival. It was wired this way progressively. So all sentient animals, so basically we need machines. We have desires. Desires are basically things that we suffer from if we don't manage to satisfy them. We manage to suffer. So you have the basic ones, for example, hunger, sleep. I need to fuck, those kind of stuff. And there's this idea of reward, of pleasure. But I would argue that the pleasure is kind of some kind of delusion. You need to ask yourself honestly, would we be looking for joy, pleasure, all this kind of fun, if we never were bothered in any way by its absence? If you were never horny, if you were never sexually frustrated, would you have any interest in having sex, really? Right? That's just an example. So people will talk a lot about all the joys of life, all the pleasure that you can experience, and only you can argue when you look at the average life of the, not only the average human, but also the average sentient being on this planet, even more so. Is there that much pleasure? There was that, point of Schopenhauer that if you want, some people argue that there's a balance between the pleasure and suffering in nature. And if you want to realize how that's just bullshit, you just have to consider a situation where we have two animals, one of which is engaged in eating the other. Compare the suffering of one and the pleasure of the other. It's just ridiculous. And the average sentient being on this planet, I'm not the first one making this point, but you have all those strategist animals that make a lot of babies, and just some of them are going to survive, right? So the average animal in a lot of species dies as a baby over and over and over again. That's the average life of things that can feel, right? Like, rats and all this stuff, they have feelings. We know they're pretty smart, and this happens over and over again. So you have to ask yourself, when you're going to consider whether or not you're going to procreate, what am I going to do, right? You're just going to create a need machine to satisfy some of your own need. It didn't have a need to be born. It didn't have a need to experience anything of life, okay? It didn't need to look at the trees or anything. It was just nothing. And you just impose those needs on it, and the only fix that can happen, for itself at least, is it can satisfy some of those needs and avoid some of the harm. And once it will be here, we'll have a programming to want to continue to survive. But really, a lot of people will give value to life. I would argue that life is completely overrated in a lot of ways. In the sense that obviously they're going to be biased by this biological programming to value your own life. And even I am, right? If someone came up and pointed a shotgun to my head, I would be pretty scared, obviously. But we have to think about it. Is that really rational? If you died in your sleep, and you didn't even realize it, you didn't expect it, and you felt no suffering, you just died. Arguably, some of your friends and family might be sad about it because they're still here and they still have sentient experiences, but can we really say that you were harmed in the situation? There was no suffering in the process itself. Some people argue, yeah, but I had all those, all those years to live for. I had all those aspirations, but the thing is that those desires are just gone. It's not like they're left unsatisfied and you have some kind of regrets or anything. They're just gone. So, yeah, you're just going to create a need machine, and arguably, the only reason why you would do that is to satisfy some of your own needs. You're a need machine too, and I'm yet to find any selfless reason to reproduce. I mean, yeah, there's so many people out there that would say, oh, my kid is going to do great things, and I'm going to raise it right, to do all those things. But how much of it has to do with your genes, really? Honestly. Couldn't you just adopt some other kid, or try to make the world a better place in some other way? Or maybe just do it yourself? Why would you impose that agenda of fixing the mess that the existence of sentient life made on this planet on your kid that didn't even need to be here? Why not do it yourself? So we see tons of problems here, but the whole problem really is that if you consider that all we can do is pretty much satisfy desires that we feel and reduce the suffering that we experience, you can understand how some individuals, whether they're human or not, can, throughout their existence overall, have an impact in the sense that they reduce more suffering than they cause and experience, right? So when it comes to yourself, you're always going to have a negative, conclusion. It's always going to be, okay, I avoided a lot of bad, but I still got that. So for yourself, it's only going to be bad. But the point is that you can reduce more negative throughout your existence than what you're going to cause. That's a possibility. But that's only possible in the context in which we exist, in the sense that the average sentient being is always going to cause more suffering and more problems, the average, than it's going to be able to fix, because that's just how the game works. So really, why are people so obsessed by this idea of keeping life a thing, right? I mean, I'm not even going to talk about stupid shit like my genes or my family name or my stupid culture that I have attachment to, all those death denial mechanisms, in the sense that, okay, I'm going to get into it a little bit, in the sense that people are obviously afraid of death, and for human beings, because they're aware of the fact that they're going to die, and human beings, they get into tons of defense mechanisms, some denial mechanisms, like, oh, I'm going to participate into that thing, like my lineage or my culture that's going to go beyond my own existence, okay? I'm going to be dead, but it's still going to be there, so in a sense I'm still here, you're really not here. That's another aspect that people barely think about when they have kids. When you're going to have a baby, you're not just having a kid, you're making a human being. That's the whole life you're creating, okay? 70 years later, it might be in a retirement, home or some bullshit like that, maybe dying of cancer and all this shit. How many people actually think about the fact that their kid, is someday going to age and grow old and die? Most likely, right? If it doesn't die before, but how many people actually think about this shit? Pretty much none of them. There's just that censorship. I'm convinced that most human beings, human beings in general, basically, because we're smart enough to figure out things like the fact that we're going to die and all this shit, and obviously that's useful because we can do technology and we invented writing and all this shit, so that's cool, but because of that, we're too smart for our own good, because we see the fucked up shit around us, and I guess some of us, don't have good defense mechanisms, or the shit we go through, even though my life was not necessarily dramatic, I'm not miserable. If happiness means anything, it could be, oh, you're pretty confident you can satisfy your own needs, and you're not in too much suffering, and you're also not too stressed about being able to satisfy your needs in the long term. And if that's really what happiness is, arguably I'm happy. I'm not a miserable fuck. It's just an analysis of what I am and what is happening around me. I mean, you can hear this fucking bug singing in trees since the beginning of the video. What are they doing? They're just singing to reproduce. That's it. It's reproduction for the sake of reproduction. There's no other purpose. It's fucking pointless, and it's just going to cause suffering for no reason. So, yeah, I think I'm done here. Arguably, why should I be explaining why I'm against reproduction? Why I'm not going to create a human being? Why I went vegan and all this shit? I think the justification comes on the one that imposed life. If you're going to create a human being, if you want to impose all this shit, what's your justification for it? Okay, oh, you think your kid might cure cancer? Yeah, your kid is statistically more likely to die horribly from a cancer rather than help anyone with it, because that's just how it works. And you're not fucking special. Your genes are not special. I think the point is made, honestly. Yeah, I think I'm gonna stop here. That's why I'm an anti-nihilist. That's because life is basically a replicating molecule that just causes, annoyingly, right, the whole evolutionary process is blind, it has no intention, but it ended up creating a complete horror story where it made things that care about things in a world where things they care about cannot be met. You know, their needs can't be satisfied. Just for the sake of continuing replicating molecule. For no purpose, no goal. Seriously, people who want to send humans on Mars and to have space colonies, what are they gonna accomplish? Okay, the universe, I mean, I'm not saying anything new, but the universe doesn't need, you know, humans everywhere. There's no value gained from that. You're just going to create more needers, and you think that somehow you're going to be able to turn the inherently negative game into a positive. You know, or some other people think about transhumanism and all this shit. Okay, Mars is fine as it is. It has no living things on it, no need, it has cancer rate 0, okay? It has nothing, no issue. And you just want to import, you know, our capacity for misery and all this shit on it. Well, that's just fucking great. Yeah, no, how about you don't do that? How about you just don't impose that shit, understand what you are, and don't impose it. I think that would be a good start. We could have a debate about how you could engineer the end of life on this planet, right? And how, yes, you know, because we're the only smart ones, perhaps some of us will have to stay out a little longer if we're gonna have the plan to stop all this mess. But really, I think probably not creating another needer, not creating unnecessary suffering and trying throughout your life, if you have the ability, if you're in the right you know, position when it comes to your resources, your time, your money, and also your mental health, to try to make this place less shitty. But really, you don't need to bring someone else into it. You don't need to do that. And even if you feel a need for that, you can just realize that by doing so, you're going to create a lifetime of need, just to satisfy your little need. Is that worth it?